G'day YouTube. Warbles on a lot here. Sampling the view. From Contemplation Rock. Contemplating the apparently professionally choreographed campaign of bots on social media, picked up, magnified and multiplied by the mainstream media, alleging and asserting and crying with alarm, pretending that arson has been some kind of a really major factor in Australia's current ongoing existing bushfire emergency crisis. I say pretending because just on my rough figures, at some point there in various conversations I've transposed a decimal place and since spoken to my son, the brigade captain, and he's corrected me on it. Now on current figures, I saw a CNN news clip this morning quoting the New South Wales police have arrested 24 people for deliberately lighting bushfires. Actually, the police have arrested and charged 24 people for illegally lighting fires. As I understand it, something like 5 of them were illegally or without permission, without consultation, lighting what they considered to be backburns, defensive backburns. However, they weren't actually imminently threatened by fire. There was a fire somewhere over their horizon and they decided, oh, bugger it, I'll light the fire and fight the fire on my terms. So they lit a little burn around their house and sent it off into the wilderness. Something like 5 of them. One fella lit 3. Didn't ring in, talk to fire control or anything about it, didn't pay any attention to who might be out there in the forest that he was lighting up. No, they just did the selfish thing. Okay, there was about 4 where you had children or teenagers mucking around with fireworks on the biggest patch of open ground they could find, which was generally dead dry grass beside the housing estate or something. And yeah, there were a couple of nighttime fires that nearly cooked a few houses with that. There was a couple of car crashes, but I don't think they would have got arrested for lighting the fires that they caused. There was a stolen car that the lunatic who went for a joyride got to the end of the joyride, and maybe they'd done it so many times they just couldn't help themselves, or maybe they'd just heard about it and they knew that when you get to the end of the joyride, you got to burn the car to get rid of the evidence. So yeah, joyride out of Bingara, and they burnt the car and caused a fucking huge fire doing that. But the first fire that caused problems around here, it was called the Kingsgate fire, and then it got bigger and they called it the Kangawalla fire because it had burnt onto the Kangawalla Game Reserve. And then it was called the Shannon Vale fire for a while, and then it was sort of more or less put to bed, and it was either Shannon Vale or Kangawalla. It was the still smouldering fire ground which was stirred up on the 8th of November and sent an ember off to Tommy's Rock, and Tommy's Rock flared, and then ember attacked Die Hard Creek, and that's what burnt Waitalabar. So you backtrack that all the way back. What happened on Kingsgate back in September? Well, there was leaf litter like this stuff around, and bear in mind this had 32.5 millimetres of rain on it last night, so this is pretty good, but the dead leaves are still on the ground. And there was heavy earth-moving machinery. Now, I couldn't tell you with surety whether it was a backhoe or a skidder or a bulldozer, but there was something with caterpillar tracks, and that's steel onto the ground. And they were in, I'm guessing, granite country. So, they struck a spark and they caused that fire. That's how dry the landscape is. But the big major factor is lightning. I think there was either 16 or 11 fires caused by 160 lightning strikes out of one storm in one night just here in the Northern Tablelands area. And I get that from young fellow, me lad, who's a brigade captain who has access to the RFS website, and they have a lightning tracker. So they know how many strikes there are and they know in what areas, and they can narrow it down kind of to the point where they were able to tell the difference in October between a lightning strike out over there on the adjoining neighbour's place that gave us a 6-hour, 6-truck fire to play with just on sundown after 0.75 of a millimetres rain. They could tell that from a lightning strike out there that the farmer was able to put out by himself. Whether that's done from space with a satellite, or Harry Potter's got a magic wand and a map and he shuts his eyes and points, I don't know, but they can do it. They can tell how many lightning strikes come out of a storm. And then, of course, they wait for the triple O calls. So that means that 24 human-caused fires from August to now, over August, September, October, November, December, 5 months, 24 caused by humans, probably 5 or so, maybe 8, caused by malevolent individuals who've gone out there and played with fire in the landscape deliberately because they wanted to cause a fire. Now, one of them was captured because people saw him coming out of the bush covered in soot just after a couple of fires had mysteriously happened. Others have kind of been on the police horizon being watched. There are some people in Australia who have such a known predilection for lighting fires that during periods of total fire ban, they have to check in at the police station in person a couple of times a day. There are people who have radio tracking devices on their cars because they are suspected of having lit previous fires that it's been impossible to prove. Therefore, in bushfire season, they're on the watch list. Not just vaguely known about on the horizon, they are on the watch list. So kind of the only people who've got an ambition to light the country up are the people who've never done it before. They're the only ones who are going to slip out and do it. Like young kids who think, oh yeah, it's cool, let's go and light a fire. That's my understanding. On the raw figures of the Victorian fires, 1 in 16 of the deaths in Australian bushfires are caused by arson. But that was a very unusual day and it was a total outlier, and you really can't compare it to anything because the lessons learned then have led to the level of preparedness we've got now. And the level of preparedness we've got now is such that one thing my son said to me recently still sticks in my mind. He said, at least the training and the equipment have proved to be good. And I said, okay, unpack that for me. And he said, the firefighters who've died have been killed by vehicle accidents. A tree's fallen on the cabin, you know. Okay, that's pretty difficult to prevent by training or anything. It's just that you know it's a possibility, you hope it's going to be okay. And I said to him at the time, well, maybe they're going to have to come up with fire trucks that have a rollover cage or a tree catching cage on top of the cabin. Within a month or so, I'd seen photos on internet, YouTube, of fire trucks that have got tree catching cages over the top, as well as having crew saving sprayers. My idea had been combine the two, but the crew saver is stainless steel pipes that have got to be mounted really close to the cabin to stop them getting ripped off by branches. Presumably the tree catching cages will be really big and strong and they'll be mounted over the top. They won't be ripped off by the branches. They'll tear the branch off the tree or they'll stop the truck. Roundabouts and swings. And you know, there's another fellow who's been killed when he was in a fire truck that got lifted off the ground bodily, an 8-ton fire truck, and flipped upside down. Apparently, there was a really hot bubble of air over a large fire ground, and when they drove their fire truck out onto it, that was sufficient of a disturbance to break the Coanda effect that had that air bubble stuck to the ground. It started to rise. As it rose, it was so much hotter than the air above it. Whoosh, off it went, sucking air in from all directions. The induced wind at ground level, probably well over 200 kilometres an hour, and as it gets to the fire truck, that's when it lifts up and goes straight up. And it did that under their back axles. So under those circumstances, yes, a fire truck has enough wing area at those airspeeds and that angle of attack to fly, very briefly. Nobody could have anticipated it, but it has been proved to have occurred. It's not something you can really train against, but I'm going to have this conversation with my son and draw his mind back to the days when we used to aerotail launch hang gliders, and we used to always make sure never to go out into a dead still on a hot airfield, because the wingtip vortices of the tug would be enough as they roll off the wingtips. That would break loose the bubble of hot air. It would go up, the tug would get sucked off the ground at 200, 300 metres per minute, straight up. The hang glider on the trolley tied to the tail of the tug, it would get drawn in and then encompassed by the cold air rushing in at ground level, and it wouldn't be able to climb. Up it would all go, and it would generally end sort of in tears. So yeah, he was a little kid and he watched us dealing with that. So I'm going to tell him, make sure there's wind blowing when you drive out onto a hot ground. If there's absolutely no wind, don't go out there lest you trigger a thermal break off and you find yourself with a fire tornado blowing up your arsehole. Sort of father-son talks you get to have in these conditions. So anyway, bottom line is, yeah, arsonists, if you look at the worst case scenario, which was Victoria 12 years ago, responsible for about 1 in 16 deaths. 172 died on the day, 162 were killed by power lines. And on the topic of power lines, hold that thought. Let's stand up and go for a short walk. From the dam, we'll go up on top of the hill where I keep a captured power line, just in case I want to interrogate it from time to time and see what it has to tell me about the future. Suppose I might as well show you the walk up so you can see what sort of a fuel burden there is here. I have never burned this. This is the southwestern face of a hill. I'm thinking the big trees here, some of these big trees they've got burn marks on them from the 1958 fire. The soil's fallen off the ground. I'd say these are what's grown back since the clearing and burning that went on after the gold rush. That's been cut with a chainsaw and then they've found that it's hollow, so they've left it there. Probably somebody wanting to make a fence. That looks like a Coolamon scar rather than a burn scar, but I don't know, might be wrong. There is the whole thing's what I call tubular regrowth. Once upon a time there was a tree around here which was ring-barked and burned, probably in about 1870. And then it's grown back, and this could be 1930, I don't know. And then it's died and stood there, and somebody's cut it down with a chainsaw. And chainsaws didn't really show up till 50, 55. Welcome to Freelance Forest Archaeology. I figure if you pay for the title deed, you got to be able to kind of explain what's happened to every tree that you got growing on your place, the place for which you are responsible. These two stringy barks, they're a coppice on what was once upon a time a stringy bark sapling, and that fire was 1958, and they've grown back and died and then fallen over. This is kind of what I call slow time country. It takes so long for anything to grow here that you really have to be sure of yourself before you decide to suddenly go willy-nilly making changes on the landscape. Because whatever you do, it doesn't go away anytime soon. And whatever's left is always going to try to regrow and cling to life. This stump is trying to put up new solar panels after losing probably 120 years worth of continual effort just to live here. Beside its parent. Longleaf spike rush, Aboriginal food plant, useful for weaving mats, nets, screens. Somebody's garden here once upon a time, I guess, if you look at it like that. Follow the wallaby trail. They're a lot shorter than me though, I have to duck pretty hard. Getting around these wattles is the trouble. Talked about interrogating the power lines. That's where we've just come from. And as soon as you get out from under the canopy, the landscape changes. Because out here, it's all been scoured and cleared to provide an easement corridor. And this gets helicoptered every year, generally twice. Sometimes they fly up it real fast and they have a high-speed camera, and other times they fly up it a bit slower and they have an infrared camera. And every now and then they show up and they do something. Once upon a time they used to ring you up and tell you they were going to do something, but it's all been privatised now. And about 4 years ago, I suddenly heard heavy machinery up here. Thought I'd better come and investigate, see what was going on. I thought about putting a bulldozer over this. I could make a fire trail. Somewhere to try and stop a fire coming from the highway. My son suggested I do it. Turned out I had a choice. Bulldozing a fire trail under the power lines, which would be maybe as wide as these wheel tracks, no more. Next door neighbour's got a tiny little bulldozer. Or instead of paying him to do that, I could get a tree surgeon up here for 3 hours and get rid of a lot of the fuel right up close to the house. So, behold, a wooden structure. However, the one on the western side, it has a galvanised steel rectangular tube used to suspend what they call the lightning conductor. The eastern side of the tower, it has a timber lightning conductor riser, as they call it. A lightning conductor riser post. If you look at the wires, you'll see we've got one thick wire which has concrete mass balances on it. We have a thinner wire which has spiral, they're sort of like shock absorbers, you know, when the fibre optic cable they surround wigwags backwards and forwards, east to west in the wind. That prevents the wave from travelling all the way up to the connection and thus fatiguing the fibre optic cables. Then there's a really thin wire, and that's high up above the previous two. It's the lightning conductor. And when lightning strikes, it's supposed to run along that wire and come down a metal conductor on the post. There's another actual conductor wire with the concrete bob weights. They also take the shake out of the wire. There's another lightning conductor wire attached to the wooden pole, and there's your power conductor with its concrete bob weights. So there's a fair bit of vertical compression strain on that thing. Significant amount, you know, like they had a couple of cranes, and one of the cranes was to lift the lightning conductor wire and hold it up while they used the other crane to change the post. And they had a bloke up there on a cherry picker on a jib boom doing the work. Here you can see the actual lightning conductor, which has a wooden insulator nailed over the top of it. This is really high tech, this is. You just don't see this quality work done in modern Australia. And then the lightning conductor comes out and it goes to a couple of different earth pegs here, and then there's a cable going off to another earth peg. And the whole idea is that this prevents the actual power grid from being struck by lightning. But it also means that any significant gusty wind loading on that lightning conductor, imparting side-to-side stresses, it gets to focus on a 58-year-old piece of timber which has been continually under a compression strain. And I know that it probably needs to be replaced because I saw what came off that spot when they cut it up in order to fit it in the back of their ute to cart it away. Probably for someone's use as firewood. So what are the chances? This is why I come up to interrogate the power line. Bear in mind this power line pretty much bisects my country. You can see my boundary fence with the change in the vegetation over there. So I've got 50 acres on either side of the power line. Out there to the east, there's no old trees out there. All of that, surprisingly, is pretty much only 150 years old. It's kind of weird, but that's what I find out there. Out here on the western side, well, I used to have a lot more big old trees than I currently do, because so many of them had their roots into a crack in the underlying bedrock that was shallow enough that they've run out of water. Not all of them, but a surprising lot. And for the record, I've never tried to burn out there. No way, no how, haven't got around to it. I've started up the other end. In 1994, I put in a few little burns. Again in 95, 96, just little burns at night, not really knowing what I was doing. 2 infant school or primary school age kids to help. Yeah, that's an infant school. So I didn't do much. 1998, the kids were off living with their mother most of the time, so I could put in some dedicated burns. I did one burn that was about 25 acres, perhaps. Call it 15 anyway. And I got away with it, but I had a few frights, and I decided to learn a bit more about it. And I got a whippersnipper. Finished up. I burnt out 2 of them. And I used to slash maybe 3 acres. Hell of a lot of work. Hell of a lot of 2-stroke fuel. Hell of a lot of nylon string. But I undid some of the damage I'd done back in the time when I was trying to burn every year, because that just gets rid of all your organic matter, and soil is organic matter. There's no such thing as, quote, mineral earth. Mineral earth is what you call sand or rocks. You can't grow anything in sand or rocks. You have to have organic soil, and organic soil is organic matter, and when organic matter gets dry, it will burn. Big problem with having missed out on 10% of average rain every year for 10 years during the millennial drought. So everybody missed out on an entire year spread out over 10 years. And now we've just missed out on 91%, 93% of a year's rain in only 2 years. And we've had record high temperatures. Right here, there's been 3 degrees of warming since 2013, and there's been 4.94 degrees of warming since 2007. So 3 degrees of warming in Barnaby Joyce's electorate, when the figures concerned are the average December temperature, monthly average for December, 2007, 2013, 2018, 2019. So everything slowly almost died of thirst in the millennial drought. After the millennial drought, we didn't get 4 years in a row with 120% of rain. We got maybe 110% of the long-term average once, and we got some intense floods, but we were kind of lucky to get average annual rain, And then we went into this latest fish-killing heatwave terminal drought with firestorms bouncing around the bloody landscape. Can you hear my footsteps? And this got 32.5 millimetres last night. 22 millimetres at 5:30. Another 3 millimetres by 8 o'clock. Another 7.5. Sometime around midnight. 32.5. Very close to 130 tonnes per acre. And I've been patting myself on the head for putting 28 tonnes out in a month on 1.25 acres. So yeah, 3 times more per acre in a month, in one night, than I've achieved in a month on the bit that I've been trying to keep alive, keep it wet, keep it green. Oh, wow. So if an arsonist does go and light a fire at the moment, they have a very receptive palate with which to work. If anything else causes a fire, farmers welding gates, bulldozers on stony ground on a hot day. I think five of the people who've been charged with illegally lighting fires in New South Wales, it might be only 3, they're people who were on camping holidays and they tried to build a campfire. One fella had dug a pit in the ground and he had his fire down in the pit. But you see, we've been gripped by a bureaucratic mindset, which is the exact opposite of the Aboriginal way to deal with fire. The Aboriginal way to deal with fire was that everybody has been raised to understand how the landscape works. Everybody has been raised to be safe around fire. So nobody hundreds of miles away can tell the person on the ground what is safe and what is not. So if an Aborigine wanted to light a fire and somebody on the neighbouring Tauri, or clan land, tribal land, someone on the neighbouring Tauri sees smoke go up, they don't immediately think, oh, he must be a fuckwit, I'll have to go over and tell him that they're wrong. Not like the O call the fire brigade lines that we have. What they think is, oh well, they must know what they're doing or they wouldn't have lit it. And the country was kept in such a condition that you didn't ever have a fuel burden which would support a flame height higher than 1 or 2 metres, 3 metres at the absolute worst kind of thing. And there are some fires that you only burnt every 400 years. So you had to have a really good, strong oral culture. And they did for 12,500 years. Now here's a kind of an interesting thing. This is a disaster. I would have liked to have burnt it, but I just didn't kind of have time or get to it. This here is where you've got wild native animals grazing in a drought. Admittedly, it's got rained on last night. Over here, on the other side of the fence, you just don't have as much greenery. Because all of the greenery, all of the wet stuff, if a moo cow can eat it, a moo cow has eaten it. The stocking rates you have to carry in order to be financially viable with sheep and cows and all the rest of it means it's enormously difficult to be nice to your country. The person whose land we're looking at now, he's one of the nicest, gentlest farmers I know because he's actually an apiarist. He bought the country for its forest. He farms bees. And he only has sheep and cattle on here, generally adjusted rather than his own. He's got a missus and Billy Lids, and they've got pony club commitments. Which way will we go? Yeah, this way. So he's not trying to cover his operating costs with his sheep or his cattle. He's got them on there more or less specifically to eat the grass and try and reduce the bushfire hazard. But as I said in a different movie entirely, moo cows and bar lambs will not eat dry dead eucalyptus leaves. They won't eat sticks of any kind. You can probably mix sawdust into their feed pellets if you're really nasty, because they can digest cellulose, but you'll have to crunch it up for them. But yeah, this is the country that I didn't burn, because when I was running the program last year, I wasn't sure of my ability to not burn his fence. I practiced my technique on my own fences, not on my neighbours. So it means the real bushfire fuel bomb is this side where I have not burnt, whereas this got burnt. Yeah, that not burnt. That's where I turned the corner in 2014. So that's a 5-year-old hazard reduction burn, and that's where I didn't do it on exactly the same country. So that hasn't burnt since 1958. This, I had burnt it in 1998, and it burnt again in 2014. There's a difference in the height of the vegetation. There's a difference in the age and the colour. But something like this, it was probably reaching its use by date 5 years ago, and the heat of the fires just killed it. So it needs to fall down or be kicked down and burn in the next one. Look at that, a little green oasis on the unburnt side. Over here, dead bracken. That's a flax lily. There's a little bit of it over there. I'm going to go with depth of soil and possibly some ground moisture. So yeah, any fire from any cause is going to get a very receptive environment. You can hear the crunchy crunchies. That's on top of 32.5 millimeters last night. Box tree doing its best to come back from the dead. So yeah, out of the 24 people who were supposed to have been arrested for lighting bushfires, there were actually 24 people arrested for illegally lighting fires during a total fire ban. But I think there might have been 4, perhaps 6, who were actual arsonists. And when you listen to the people who get paid to study psychology and arsonists, what they say is that the people who can't stop themselves from lighting fire, they are generally survivors of child abuse, generally sexually and physically and verbally. You know, they're the ones who cop it really, really hard at the very, very bottom end. And that's what they do for stress relief and attention seeking, is they just play with fire. Some of them actually want to burn the whole world. That's what they want to do. They need to be noticed, discovered, assisted, treated, helped, recalibrated, remediated. Somebody needs to help them get over whatever bloody misery has upset them in the first place. I don't know who that is or how they do it. But at the moment, the best the cops can do is keep a very close surveillance eye on them. Yeah, all of this, I burnt this in the winter of 2014. And if it wasn't for the fact that the canopy has died, it wouldn't be in condition to become a fuel bomb at the moment, and it wouldn't be in a condition, well, the canopy wouldn't have died if we didn't miss out on the rain, and it would have helped if we weren't 5 degrees hotter than we were here 12 years ago, when we were in the grip of the millennial drought. The one which caused everybody to think their throats were cut, me included. Oh gee, we missed out on nearly 9% of our annual average rain. My place will never be the same. What will I do? Alack, alas. And of course, your normal farmers who'd made no provision for drought, they were hit really hard when they lost 9% of their rain. But none of the farmers, not even the best of them, ever made provision for the kind of conditions we've had for the past 2 years. And who is it who's been claiming that there's green tape somehow preventing hazard reduction burns? Why, by golly, by gosh, it's Michael McCormack, federal leader of the National Party. It's Barnaby Joyce, my local MP. The bloke who used to be Minister for Agriculture, Minister for Resources, Minister for Water, Deputy Prime Minister. The bloke who encouraged the clearing of the Brigalow scrub. The bloke who encourages mining gas and oil. Well, we haven't got any oil to mine anymore. I meant to say coal and gas. The bloke who reckons that we just have to dig it up and export it and have it burnt overseas because there's not enough Australians to burn the coal and the gas that lie under our soil. We can't burn it fast enough. Fast enough for what, Barnaby? Oh, fast enough for his mates. The lobbyists who make campaign donations to the National Party, fast enough for their liking because they have the concessions, they have the leases, they have made the investment. They are the vested interests. So to draw attention away from the fact that the underlying cause is the drop in rainfall, which is caused by deforestation on a major scale, thousands of miles upwind to here where Barnaby said it was a good idea to cut down the Brigalow scrub and grow buffalo grass for the graziers, and because of all of the fossil carbon that Australia exports, being the 5th largest source of atmospheric carbon emissions globally, because that's how much coal and oil and gas we export. We are the 5th largest source of where the carbon comes from before it gets burned somewhere on the world. The stuff we burn here, we only produce 1.3%, but we are still the 5th largest supplier of fossil fuel to the fossil fools. Isn't that an achievement? And as an exercise in blame casting, to try and distract the public from thinking about global warming and what a stupid idea it is when you're threatened by unprecedented hot, dry, windy conditions, sparking and facilitating multiple firestorms simultaneously ravaging the countryside. Everybody's come to the same conclusion except the Liberal National Party, which is we have to stop digging coal. We have to stop exporting LP gas. It's bad enough that we're probably going to burn coal and gas to keep our own economy going, but we have to try and cut that back to zero, because there is no new technology to capture it out of the atmosphere except these things, trees. So we've got to stop deforestation, we've got to plant trees, and we've got to stop burning coal and oil. And I can't see the huddled multitudes massed in the cities and suburbs, I can't see them accepting that. So their plan is to keep on with business as usual. Ask Scott Morrison, that's what he wants to do. And the only thing that's going to change their mind is when, on a stinking hot day, a dry thunderstorm sparks their landscape. And when global warming comes bowling up their driveway, that's when the right-wing jobs and growth, Liberal, National, Labor, One Nation, Palmerite, Hunter-Shooter, Fishers Party voters will finally begin to accept the fact that we're on the wrong track. We've been on the wrong track for a long, long time, but the fact that you're on the wrong track and you've been on it for a long time doesn't mean that you don't have to change. For anybody to say, oh, well, you know, like it's all very well and good to say that there's this scientific evidence that says we're making a mess of the climate, but we're really, really good at it. You know, like we are the most efficient coal miners in the world. We have the most efficient natural gas plants in the world. We have the best, cleanest coal. When they say we have the best, cleanest coal, I mean it's got the lowest sulfur and the lowest ash content. It's still coal. Coal is carbon. Carbon is the problem. You can't have clean carbon burning. It's not a possibility. We have to give up fossil carbon. To say otherwise, I like the analogy of the somnambulist who gets up to go for a wander in the middle of the night, and they wander out of their front door and they wander across into their neighbour's property, and they wander into their neighbour's house and they wander into bed, and they find their neighbour asleep. Their neighbour that they've looked lustfully after on many occasions. And for some strange reason, they decide in the midst of the dream to commence involuntarily copulating with their neighbour. And then they wake up and they find that they weren't dreaming, they were actually raping their next door neighbour, you know, like their drinking partner's wife, their drinking partner's husband. But there they are, they're raping their neighbour in their neighbour's house. They wake up in the middle of the dream. They realise what they're doing. They figure they've got a difficult decision to make as to whether to stop because it's the wrong thing to do, or whether they should keep going because they're already doing it. And, you know, like, it can go on for a while yet. That's the point in the decision-making process where the fossil fuel lobby are at. They know that what they're doing is wrong, and they're having difficulty in accepting the fact that they have to stop. They want to keep on raping their neighbour's wife, pretending that they're still in the dream where they think that it's okay. A somewhat torturous illustration, but it's valid, it's apt. It's even coherent and appropriate. To decide that it's okay to keep on burning carbon because we're good at it and we can do it efficiently, it misses the point that burning carbon is what's killing the planet. We have to stop. And our unwillingness to stop is what appears to be causing the planet to be deciding to start deconstructing the infrastructure of our civilization, and fucking good luck if we can keep our culture together when the grid falls down. And the bushfires are taking out the grid. How do you go shopping when there's no auto bank and no swipe card facilities and no debit card? Might be a smart move to get your wages in cash next week. Keep your bank account right down with a little bit of something in it to hold it open. But How do you know when the next bushfire is going to cut the grid and how long it's going to be down? Because I don't know. Haven't got a clue. Can't be predicted. The fact that it's a probabilistic likelihood, undoubtable. Ask the people between Sydney and Melbourne. They can tell you about it. Bateman's Bay, yeah? Merimbula. They all have stories. So anyway, another bloody long-winded video from Warbles. Such is life. That's what happens when they took the 15-minute upload limit away from them. It used to keep everything tight. But anyway, the bushfire psychologist I heard this morning, she seemed to feel that arson was a factor in probably 10% of Australian bushfires overall. Whereas the one example, the horror example of 162 people killed by a power line failure, multiple power line failures, 4 of them, 4 different locations, versus 10 people killed by one arsonist who just went snap popcorn stupid. That's an outlier. It's normally 1 in 10, not 1 in 16. And anybody who starts telling you that it's all the fault of the terrorist greenies who are out there lighting up the national parks because, you know, they're to blame for the fuel build-up because they won't let you burn off in the national parks, that's why they're setting fire to them now because they're greenies. Anybody who tells you that is either an idiot, they're a gullible, misinformed individual, or they are a malicious half-wit who's trolling. They're saying that shit for the laughs because it's fun to stir shit up. At least that's how I read the situation. And it's really fucking irritating to find that otherwise sensible subscribers and viewers on my channel are trying to tell me that, oh, it's all the fault of green eco-vandals. If greenies had our way, it would be illegal to have fences in Australia. All the livestock with hard feet would be banned. You'd have to have an environmental impact survey and file a statement and get it checked and rectified for every non-native unit of production. Right? So you'd have to file an environmental impact statement for every sheep and every cow. You wouldn't be allowed to have fences. And the idea is everybody would compete to keep their land in the best possible condition for grazing to attract the free-range kangaroos to come here so that they could hunt maybe 10% of them every year so that the numbers stay stable and sustainable. And instead of hunting the really big ones because, you know, they'll fill your chiller fast, which is what the whitefella kangaroo shooters do, kill the most experienced kangaroos. No, you're supposed to go out there and kill the young ones, the slow ones, the little ones. They're the ones that have the tender meat. You know, if you're a meat eater, which I'm not, but I used to be, and I've eaten a lot of kangaroo in my day. It's like fishing. You don't go and kill the biggest fish because, you know, you want the little ones to grow up. Fucking stupid. Little fish have a really high kill rate. Take as many little fish as you want. Leave the big ones, because when the little fish lay eggs, they lay 50 or 100. When the big fish lay eggs, they lay 50 or 100,000. Leave the big fish alone. Take the little ones. Leave the big kangaroos alone. Take the little ones. Don't fence your livestock in because you know they're terrified of you, they hate your guts because you're always putting the dogs on them and trying to escape. Have no fences and compete with your neighbours to have the best luscious pasture so that all the kangaroos come to your place. That's how Australia was managed before it was colonised by the Europeans, who brought all kinds of crimes to the land, including arson. There was no such thing as arson in Australia before 1788. What there was landscape management with fire. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.